In the fog-drenched streets of New Orleans' infamous Storyville, shadows conceal more than just secrets. They hide a dark past that refuses to stay buried. For decades, whispers have told of vanished women, unexplained disappearances, and a predator who moved silently through the district's narrow alleys. This is an unsolved mystery, a cold case that has haunted the city, leaving questions that may never be answered and fear that lingers in every corner. Tonight we step into those streets, following the chilling trail of the Storyville Slayer, piecing together the victims' stories, the overlooked clues, and the psychological fingerprints of a killer who may still exist in memory, if not in flesh. As we unravel this haunting tale, remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay with us through every dark corridor of true crime, where the line between curiosity and terror is razor-thin. Storyville, New Orleans in the early 20th century was a neighborhood of contrasts, vividly alive with jazz music spilling from dimly lit clubs, yet shadowed by dark alleys and whispered secrets. Beneath the flickering lights and the scent of bourbon and rain, hidden stories waited to be told, stories of desire, betrayal, and fear. Among these shadows, a series of murders began to emerge, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions, an unsolved mystery that would haunt the streets for decades. The first victims were mostly young women who worked in the district's brothels and clubs. They were ordinary, unnoticed in the grand scheme of the city, but their very ordinariness made them vulnerable. The surviving reports hint at lives marked by subtle conflicts, concealed histories, and private struggles, family secrets that may have inadvertently drawn them into the killer's path. Friends and relatives knew fragments of their lives, yet no one could see the full picture, making the women both familiar and tragically isolated. The perpetrator, if one can be definitively identified, remained a ghost in the records. No one knew his exact appearance, but scattered clues suggested a meticulous, calculating mind, capable of extreme observation and unnerving emotional detachment. Modern criminal psychologists might describe him using a psychological profile as someone potentially scarred by a troubled childhood, socially rejected, and desperate for control over an environment that had always denied him power. The subtle patterns he left behind, how he approached his victims, the way he staged crime scenes, hinted at a mind both methodical and chaotic, a chilling combination that made him invisible in plain sight. Storyville itself was the perfect backdrop for these murders. Despite being a relatively small and close-knit community, the streets were labyrinthine, the lighting poor, and the alleys shadowed, making it nearly impossible for authorities to follow or catch a phantom moving unseen. This was a small-town murder setting, but with complexity beyond what small town might imply. The social and economic tensions, coupled with the anonymity provided by crowded, winding streets, created fertile ground for crime. People lived in close quarters, yet few understood the full depth of each other's lives, an environment simultaneously comforting and dangerously deceptive. The story involved more than just the victims and the suspect. Neighbors, innkeepers, and even accomplices in the nightlife business formed a network of peripheral characters, each providing fragmented observations. Some recalled small oddities at the time, an unusual shadow outside a window, footsteps at midnight, a fleeting figure that disappeared too quickly to identify. What seemed trivial at the moment would later become crucial threads in the investigation, subtle clues that hinted at a lurking danger. Even within the victims' families, awareness of potential threats was uneven. Many concealed personal tragedies or disputes, unwilling to expose them publicly. These family secrets, when combined with the broader social environment, formed a dark backdrop against which fear and vulnerability thrived. This fear, like a shadow creeping down Storyville's narrow streets, allowed the killer to operate unseen, an invisible presence feeding on secrecy and human hesitation. An essential factor in this narrative is the psychology of the community itself. Early on, when the first murders occurred, residents often turned a blind eye, rationalized strange events, or simply dismissed their unease. Yet anxiety and suspicion slowly spread, warping trust and heightening tension. In modern terms, a psychological profile of the community would show how people living in close proximity to unexplained crime tend to deny reality, protect their own mental stability, and inadvertently shield a predator. how the community perceived the victims, how it processed the murders, and how society handled internal issues all contributed to the killer's ability to remain hidden. Combined with dim lights, jazz music, and winding streets, the tableau of Storyville became simultaneously enchanting and terrifying. Victims, suspects, and the community were all pieces of a puzzle, each element essential in understanding the bigger picture of these unresolved crimes. Ultimately, to understand why these murders happened here, one must see Storyville as more than just a physical place. It was a complex social ecosystem, a neighborhood with secrets tucked behind every door, ordinary victims with hidden lives, and a predator who thrived in the darkness. Each fragment held significance, each minor detail could illuminate the path to truth. Yet for decades, the cold case remained unsolved, leaving the streets haunted by unanswered questions and invisible fears. Before we move into the next chapter, where we will trace the murder timeline, recount the moments when the victims were last seen alive, and explore the strange behavior of the perpetrator, it is crucial for the audience to feel the atmosphere of Storyville itself. Every street lamp, every echoing footstep, every whisper of jazz music carries with it the weight of untold stories. It is in this environment that fear thrived, secrets lingered, and the first threads of a psychological profile would later guide those who dared to look deeper. Storyville was more than a setting, it was a living presence, shaping every event and influencing all who lived within its winding streets. Its shadows were both literal and metaphorical, mirroring hidden traumas, suppressed desires, and buried fears of the community. Ordinary routines, walking alone, visiting clubs, trusting neighbors, became points of vulnerability in this complex social web. To grasp the full scope of this small-town murder, one must peer into these shadows, recognize the secrets hidden in plain sight, and understand how collective silence and complicity can render a killer nearly invisible. Storyville itself became a stage for darkness, where fear and secrecy intertwined, setting the perfect environment for a predator to strike undetected. This backdrop, rich with social complexity, human vulnerability, and the ever-present tension between light and darkness, sets the stage for the story to unfold. In the following section, we will follow the murder timeline, dissecting each event, and uncover the chilling patterns left behind as we attempt to understand the mind behind the unsolved killings. The Storyville murders began quietly, almost imperceptibly. The first known victim, a young woman working at a jazz club on Basin Street, disappeared in late 1917. She was last seen alive leaving the club after a late-night shift, her figure swallowed by the fog-laden streets. Initially, her disappearance was dismissed as a routine hazard of the neighborhood's nightlife. But as months passed, a darker pattern emerged, a chilling murder timeline that would later define the Storyville Slayer case. The second victim appeared in early 1918, a young woman celebrated for her resilience and charm, often seen conversing with patrons and musicians. On the night she vanished, witnesses noted her strange behavior, anxious glances over her shoulder, subtle hesitations, a sense that she was being watched. Within weeks, another woman disappeared under eerily similar circumstances. Though initially appearing unconnected, different streets, slightly different times, the emerging pattern revealed a horrifying consistency. All victims were young women, alone at night, immersed in the entertainment scene, and vanished without leaving evidence or witnesses. By mid-1918, fear had begun to creep into Storyville. Residents noticed shadows moving oddly in the fog, and footsteps echoed in deserted alleys when no one was around. The murder timeline became increasingly apparent, disappearances every few months, each sending ripples of anxiety through the tightly knit community. Pressure mounted on local authorities, but the small police force was under-resourced and stretched thin by the city's other challenges. Early investigations focused on local men with criminal records or minor offenses, yet the killer always seemed a step ahead, leaving behind only subtle clues, easily overlooked by law enforcement. The third victim, in late 1918, marked a turning point in the case. She was last seen alive entering a carriage with a man familiar to locals, but described vaguely and almost anonymously. Her friends noted nothing unusual during the day, yet she exhibited behaviors that hindsight later classified as strange behavior: hesitant gestures, a nervous glance, and an air of unease. When her body was discovered in a secluded alley, The community was horrified. The violence suggested knowledge, control, and careful planning, instilling panic across Storyville. The once vibrant streets now felt tense, each shadow potentially hiding a predator. By early 1919, the patterns were undeniable. Ages, occupations, and daily routines revealed a chilling consistency among the victims. The emerging murder timeline demonstrated that these killings were deliberate and methodical, executed with precision to avoid witnesses. Forensic practices of the time were rudimentary, fingerprints smudged, reports misfiled, and witness statements inconsistent. Yet even with these limitations, a disturbing narrative emerged. The killer observed, selected, and struck with calculated intent, displaying a profound understanding of both the environment and the psychological vulnerabilities of his victims. The fourth and fifth victims, appearing later in 1919, marked a disturbing escalation in the killer's behavior. At several crime scenes, notes were discovered that suggested a cruel, almost playful taunting, a strange behavior indicating confidence or even pride. The messages referenced specific locations and times, details that only someone intimately familiar with Storyville could understand. Fear spread rapidly throughout the community. Women traveling alone were warned to remain cautious. Neighbors organized watch groups, and the streets, once lively with jazz and laughter, now felt tense and unsafe. Slowly, the public began to realize that these were not random acts, but the deliberate work of a serial killer, a revelation that would fuel intense speculation and growing media attention. The timing and location of the murders were particularly unnerving. The murder timeline suggested a predator, with precise knowledge of Storyville's alleys, clubs, and hidden passageways. Victims were chosen not merely for their presence, but for vulnerabilities embedded in their routines. Police reports hinted at witnesses who had seen suspicious men near the clubs, yet no definitive descriptions were ever obtained. Each lead dissipated quickly, leaving only frustration and fear behind. The killer's pattern was both methodical and adaptable, indicating someone who studied the neighborhood as carefully as the victims themselves. Then came a twist that confounded investigators. In the last known case of 1919, a young woman disappeared after a social gathering. Witnesses saw her speaking with a man previously noted in minor police reports. At the scene, a handkerchief embroidered with the initials of a prominent Storyville family was found. Dismissed at the time, this seemingly trivial clue hinted at a chilling possibility. The killer may have been hiding in plain sight, exploiting the dynamics of small-town murder to evade capture. As the murder timeline unfolded, each case added layers of chilling complexity. Victims were selected with precision, their last seen alive moments showing eerie similarities, and their disappearances punctuated by subtle but sinister signs of premeditation. Patterns emerged: stalking, calculated avoidance of witnesses, and consistent methods of isolating or luring targets. These strange behaviors, combined with meticulous timing, painted a disturbing picture, a psychological profile of a killer who knew both his victims and the landscape intimately, exploiting every routine and vulnerability. By the end of 1919, Storyville was gripped by fear and suspicion. Mothers warned daughters, patrons whispered of shadowy figures in the alleys, and the vibrant music of the district now carried undertones of dread. Despite the emerging pattern, the killer remained elusive, a phantom moving through fog-shrouded streets, leaving only fleeting evidence and unanswered questions. The story reaches a chilling twist. The handkerchief discovered at the last crime scene, embroidered with the initials of a prominent local family, hinted that the perpetrator might not have been an outsider. Someone intimately familiar with Storyville, its residents and daily rhythms, had walked unnoticed among them for years. A predator hiding in plain sight, exploiting trust and manipulating perception, had set the stage for both police intervention and widespread panic. In the next section, we will examine the investigation and public reaction, analyzing law enforcement strategies, overlooked evidence, and the media frenzy that amplified fear. We will explore police theories, public outrage, and how this was not just a spree of random crimes, but a calculated series of killings revealing both a community's vulnerabilities and the cunning of a mind that may never be fully understood. By 1920, The Storyville murders had captured the attention of both authorities and the public. The chilling murder timeline had grown impossible to ignore, and whispers in the streets were turning into outright panic. Police were under immense pressure to act, yet their early investigations were hampered by limited resources, incomplete forensics, and a community reluctant to fully cooperate. Some officers pursued leads diligently, while others dismissed clues as trivial. This inconsistent approach allowed the killer to remain elusive, exploiting both the foggy streets and the procedural gaps of law enforcement. From the beginning, crucial pieces of evidence were often overlooked. Witnesses occasionally reported seeing a man loitering near a club, or small objects, like the embroidered handkerchief discovered at the last known murder, were filed away without proper examination. In hindsight, these omissions became glaring. Historians later categorized them as evidence ignored, highlighting both the limitations of early 20th century policing and societal biases that deprioritized crimes against women working in entertainment districts. Even as patterns began to emerge, connecting victims or identifying a suspect proved nearly impossible for the overburdened police force. The police theories of the era were varied and often contradictory. Some believed the killer was an outsider, a transient stranger drawn to Storyville's nightlife. Others suspected someone embedded within the community, familiar with the streets and routines of the victims. Conflicting accounts from locals, an unidentified man near multiple crime scenes, a cab driver whose schedule coincided with disappearances or minor disputes later interpreted as suspicious, offered tantalizing yet inconclusive leads. No single suspect could be pursued aggressively, and each investigative thread seemed to dissolve, leaving the neighborhood gripped by frustration and fear. Meanwhile, the press intensified the panic. Newspapers sensationalized the murders, dubbing the perpetrator a phantom menace and portraying the victims as tragic heroines. This media frenzy amplified public fear, prompting families to restrict women's movements and business owners to hire extra security. Storyville, already burdened by social and economic tension, now simmered under the weight of paranoia and dread. Public reaction to the Storyville murders was intense and pervasive. Residents whispered about strangers, avoided dimly lit alleys, and questioned neighbors they had once trusted. Mothers warned daughters, friends exchanged cautionary tales late into the night, and the district seemed to shrink under the weight of collective anxiety. In homes and social clubs, debates raged over the killer's identity. Was it a lone transient, someone seeking personal revenge, or a calculated predator who understood the community intimately? The palpable tension reflected the killer's mastery of perception and fear, turning familiar streets into sources of dread. Despite the growing media frenzy, police investigations progressed slowly and inconsistently. Officers relied on spotty witness accounts, rudimentary forensics, and partial reconstructions of the murder timeline. Fingerprints were collected haphazardly, evidence misfiled, and key leads, including the handkerchief clue, remained buried in archives. These repeated failures, or evidence ignored, frustrated families and fueled a sense of helplessness and injustice within the community. Analysts later noted that Storyville's tight-knit social fabric complicated matters further. Residents depended on mutual trust, yet this closeness meant witnesses often withheld information, out of fear, loyalty, or disbelief, that someone they knew could commit such atrocities. In this way, the very structure of the small-town murder environment inadvertently aided the killer, concealing vital truths from investigators. A particularly striking episode involved a young woman who narrowly escaped an attack. Her fragmented account, descriptions of a shadowy figure and whispered threats, was initially dismissed by the police, who questioned her reliability. In hindsight, her story revealed patterns ignored by investigators. Conflicting police theories, ranging from opportunistic attacks to premeditated planning, dictated the flawed strategies that followed, leaving gaps the killer exploited and the community living in persistent fear. Meanwhile, the press continued to sensationalize the Storyville murders. Artists, poets, and writers romanticized the district as a hub of jazz, vice, and danger, blurring the line between entertainment and terror. Tourists consumed these tales eagerly, while locals felt increasingly scrutinized. turning the killings into a social phenomenon as much as a criminal investigation. Speculation often outpaced facts. Some blamed transient workers, others suspected influential families or hidden grudges. Each rumor reflected underlying anxieties and reinforced the idea that no one was truly safe. By late 1920, the growing media frenzy combined with the clear pattern of killings attracted national attention. Newspapers in cities far from New Orleans reported on the case, amplifying both fear and fascination. Sociologists later noted that the interaction of press coverage, public behavior, and flawed police investigations created a feedback loop, intensifying panic. The Storyville Slayer became more than a murderer. He was a symbol of vulnerability, his presence magnified through every headline, whispered story, and misstep in the investigation. Yet amidst the chaos, some investigative threads remained tantalizingly close to resolution. The handkerchief, initially dismissed, pointed toward someone familiar with the district's elite. Witness accounts of strange behavior when pieced together suggested a cunning individual who observed, manipulated, and timed actions carefully. Although no arrest was made, these clues formed the basis for later analyses, hinting at a killer's mindset that combined intimate knowledge of the victims, the environment, and the psychology of the community. The twist at the end of this chapter is as haunting as it is perplexing. Despite repeated investigations, media coverage, and public panic, the killer was never apprehended. Clues were present, patterns emerged, and suspects were identified, but each trail dissolved, leaving Storyville with a lingering question. How could someone so deeply embedded in the community evade detection for so long? This unanswered question would carry forward into the final exploration of the case, where psychological insights and reflections on the aftermath provide both illumination and enduring mystery. In the next section, we will examine the psychological insight and aftermath of the Storyville Slayer case, analyzing the killer's mindset, the role of trauma psychology, and considering why these murders occurred. We will explore the chilling possibility that the answers may be locked forever in the shadows of Storyville, leaving only speculation, fear, and the cold reality of unsolved crimes. The Storyville Slayer case, unresolved for decades, offers a chilling window into the mind behind the murders. While the identities of the victims and the suspect remain shrouded in uncertainty, modern psychological frameworks allow us to explore the killer's mindset. This is not speculation for entertainment alone. It is an attempt to understand the calculated, methodical, and deeply disturbing logic that drove someone to prey upon the vulnerable, manipulating both the environment and human psychology with chilling precision. From the patterns revealed in the murder timeline, it is evident that the perpetrator possessed a keen awareness of opportunity and risk. Each victim was selected for vulnerability, each disappearance carefully orchestrated to avoid detection. The repeated behaviors, the precise timing, the avoidance of witnesses, the subtle taunting, reflect a mind that derived a sense of control from instilling fear. In the study of criminal behavior, these traits align with what psychologists identify as organized, methodical killers. Individuals who combine patience, planning, and situational awareness, often masking their deviant tendencies behind a facade of normalcy. Trauma psychology may also offer insights into why such acts occurred. Many offenders with similar patterns have histories marked by neglect, abuse, or early exposure to violence. Childhood trauma can distort empathy, warp moral reasoning, and amplify desires for control or dominance. If the Storyville Slayer experienced similar formative experiences, the killings may represent an attempt to reclaim power or enact retribution against a world that once left him powerless. The consistent strange behaviors and manipulation of victims hint at someone who relishes not only the act itself, but the psychological control exerted over others. Moreover, the urban fabric of Storyville itself cannot be overlooked. The community, tightly knit yet permissive in its nightlife culture, provided both opportunity and anonymity. The killer's repeated evasion of law enforcement demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of why they did it. By exploiting societal blind spots, procedural oversights, and community trust, he maintained freedom while instilling terror. Every misstep in police response, evidence ignored, incomplete interviews, and flawed police theories fueled his confidence, allowing him to operate without consequence. In considering the victims, the interplay between family secrets and public exposure may also have contributed to their vulnerability. Lives concealed by social expectation or personal shame created openings for manipulation. Each victim's ordinary routine, leaving a club, walking home alone, trusting acquaintances, became a vector for danger. The killer's acute awareness of these social dynamics is a hallmark of the killer's mindset, reflecting a predator who observes, calculates, and exploits human psychology in addition to physical opportunity. The aftermath of the case left profound psychological and social ripples through Storyville. Families of victims were haunted not only by grief, but by unanswered questions, forced to grapple with the chilling reality that someone they may have known, someone embedded in their community, was capable of such acts. Locals reported lingering fear in daily routines, women traveling in pairs or groups, whispers of suspicious figures in alleyways, and an ever-present anxiety that the predator might still be nearby. This collective trauma, amplified by media frenzy and sensationalized reporting, cemented Storyville's dark reputation for decades. Modern analysts have also suggested hypothetical investigative directions that might have broken the case, applying contemporary methods like behavioral profiling, forensic psychology, and pattern recognition. Examining the killer's mindset today could involve mapping the sequence of murders against known psychological traits, reconstructing victim routines, and identifying anomalies in witness statements previously overlooked. Similarly, understanding trauma psychology in both the perpetrator and the community could shed light on patterns of vulnerability, potentially guiding preventive strategies in comparable environments. Yet, the case remains an open-ended puzzle, a cold case emblematic of the limits of early investigative techniques and the enduring elusiveness of human malice. Perhaps most haunting is the unresolved nature of the Storyville Slayer. Without closure, the question of why they did it continues to provoke fear and fascination. Was it personal revenge, deep-seated rage, or a pathological compulsion? The calculated precision and repeated targeting suggest more than mere opportunity. It hints at obsession, a compulsion intertwined with a psychological need for dominance and secrecy. The lack of resolution allows the imagination to fill gaps, making the story more terrifying, more intimate, because the killer could have been anyone, and the darkness could still exist. On a broader level, the Storyville murders highlight the fragility of human perception. Communities rely on trust, routines, and predictable patterns to navigate life safely. But the Slayer exposed vulnerabilities in these assumptions. Ordinary streets, familiar faces, and everyday behaviors were transformed into instruments of fear, manipulated by a predator who understood not only physical opportunity but the subtle psychology of his victims. The killer's mindset emerges as a study in exploiting societal norms, a stark reminder that terror often resides as much in perception and expectation as in the acts themselves. The terror of Storyville was intensely personal for the community. The trauma psychology of residents, grief, paranoia, and constant vigilance was as real as the murders themselves. People navigated familiar streets with suspicion, aware that someone they saw daily might harbor lethal intent. The unresolved nature of the case left a heavy silence, a void where answers should have been. This absence of closure was compounded by the unsettling reality that the predator's logic, hidden for decades, remained largely incomprehensible. Fear lingered long after the murders, shaping the community's collective psyche. Even today, Storyville embodies both resilience and unease. Its streets carry memory, its shadows echo with unanswered questions, and the lessons of these unsolved murders continue to resonate in studies of crime, psychology, and social dynamics. The killer's mindset reveals the depths of human darkness, while the trauma psychology illustrates the enduring cost to individuals and communities alike. Ultimately, the Storyville Slayer remains unidentified, unpunished, and haunting, a stark reminder that some darkness cannot be illuminated. The silence is deafening, the shadows unyielding, and the sense of unresolved terror, historical and psychological, endures, leaving an unsettling truth. Not all mysteries are meant to be solved. The Storyville Slayer case leaves us with more questions than answers. The streets of New Orleans carry whispers of the unknown, shadows of fear, and the lingering presence of a predator who may never be identified. Perhaps the greatest terror is not just the acts themselves, but the realization that human perception and trust can be so easily exploited. The killer's mindset teaches us about calculated cruelty. Trauma psychology reminds us of the deep impact on both victims and communities. And the haunting question of why they did it lingers unanswered, compelling us to reflect on the darkness that can reside in familiar places, and perhaps within ourselves. If fear is a mirror, Storyville reflects not only its dark past, but the fragile vulnerabilities of every human society. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime tales that explore the shadows of human nature.
References 1. Newton, M. 2000. The Encyclopedia of Unsolved Crimes, Cold Cases and True Stories. Point 2. Guiley, R. E. 2005. The Encyclopedia of Ghosts and Spirits, Hauntings and Legends. Point 3. Schechter, H. 2010. The Serial Killer Files, Minds, Methods, and Madness of Killers.